Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. First, a warning. The following introduction and our conversation today describes an extrajudicial killing. Here in front of me is a newspaper illustration. It's not elaborate, no color, just black ink on paper sketching out the figure of a man. His head is tilted forward, his hands are bound at his waist, his feet dangle over the surface of a river. The drawing is captioned, "Scene of a Hanging," and it was on the front page of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch 129 years ago. That was when it ran alongside a story about the lynching of a 21-year-old black man named John Buckner. It was reported from Valley Park, and the article and its illustration represent some of the few pieces of information we have about the killing. Nothing in that image is in dispute, neither where it happened, which is a bridge spanning the Meramec River, or how a mob dragged Buckner from a local jail and hanged him on that bridge. No one was ever prosecuted for the murder. Almost 130 years after that lynching was reported in the Post-Dispatch, two related questions have come up. Where and how do we memorialize it today? Efforts to answer those questions have run into a roadblock. City officials say Buckner wasn't lynched in their municipality, and therefore the city shouldn't be expected to recognize him within its borders. Here to talk about that effort and where it now stands, we welcome Geoff Ward to our studio. Geoff is a professor of African and African American Studies at Washington University and a member of the Reparative Justice Coalition. Geoff, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Now, Geoff, you're part of a group called the Reparative Justice Coalition of St. Louis. What is this group, and what is its interest in events like the lynching of John Buckner?
Well, many of your listeners may be aware of the national organization called Equal Justice Initiative, led by Brian Stevenson, which many years ago embarked on an effort to advance our nation's reckoning with the history and legacy of racial terror lynchings. This is manifest in the National Memorial to Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama. But EJI also invited communities where lynchings occurred to participate in this remembrance effort, and it organized a project called Community Remembrance Projects that counties could work on in partnership with EJI to address the history and legacy of lynching in their communities. The Reparative Justice Coalition of St. Louis is the name of the organization we formed to lead a St. Louis Community Remembrance Project. And I'll just add that we're one of at least 8 community remembrance projects in Missouri. Mm. Missouri is the only state with a statewide community remembrance project. It's based in Kansas City.
Okay. And is that because there was a very particular thing that happened in Missouri? So the EJI, Equal Justice Initiative, described John Buckner's lynching as one of at least 68 documented victims of racial terror here in Missouri between the years of 1863 and 1950. So those years fall roughly between the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement. I mean, what was that era of racial terror like in Missouri? And is that why it warrants sort of a statewide effort?
Well, Missouri had the highest number of lynchings of any state outside the South. There were other states, of course, in our country which have a more infamous record regarding racial terror lynching, but that's one reason. I think another reason Missouri has become really organized around this is because there were existing efforts in the state to address issues like mass incarceration and inequality in the death penalty that were mobilized by EJI's call for communities to organize around these issues. Equal Justice Initiative itself began working on this after many, many years of advocacy around equal justice in the criminal legal system. And their determination was that we would never, as a nation, reach a point where we could become committed to equal justice in the administration of criminal law unless we dealt with these fundamental issues of historic injustice that have desensitized us to the problem of unequal protection under law. So I think that's a key reason why Missouri became deeply involved is that there were groups organizing already, like Missourians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, that really responded to that call.
Okay, so it was a meeting of movements in a moment.
Yeah.
So let's get to the conflict here. The Reparative Justice Coalition of St. Louis wants to put a memorial to John Buckner's killing in the place where he was killed. Valley Park, the city of Valley Park, is denying that request. Geoff, what are the reasons that they've given?
Well, first I want to say that our Community Remembrance Project has already been engaged in the remembrance of this lynching, as well as the lynching of Francis McIntosh, here in the boundaries of the city of St. Louis in the vicinity of Keener Plaza. And that began with soil collection ceremonies we held in both locations, and people may be familiar with those soil jars, which are part of the commemorative process. The next step we were taking is the placement of historical markers. And we've asked both the city of St. Louis and the city of Valley Park if they would support us placing these markers. The response we received from Valley Park was that they were not supportive of us placing a marker in the boundaries of the city because their conclusion is that the lynching did not occur within the city of Valley Park, and that a more appropriate location would be on the southern end of the bridge, which is in the jurisdiction of St. Louis County.
So I'd like to introduce another voice into this conversation that's very relevant to the wheres here and the whos. The location of the proposed memorial to John Buckner is on the Meramec Greenway at the Arnold's Grove trailhead, and the Greenway is maintained by the nonprofit Great Rivers Greenway. Elizabeth Simmons is the nonprofit's community program manager, and she is also with us today. Elizabeth, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you for having me.
So the Post-Dispatch reported that your nonprofit reached out to Valley Park in May, which has sort of brought about this response that Geoff was just talking about. And what you had done then was request a permit to install a plaque to commemorate the lynching. What was Valley Park's response then?
Yeah, so Great Rivers Greenway is the public agency that designs and builds greenways all over the region, and they are operated and maintained by our partner. So in this case, this portion of the Meramec Greenway is operated and maintained by the city of Valley Park. So while Great Rivers Greenway installs interpretive signs and markers on greenways all over the region, we have to get permission in order to be able to do so from the entity that owns the property where the greenway is located. So this is why I reached out to the city of Valley Park asking for permission to install a marker. And we are partners. Great Rivers Greenway and the city of Valley Park are partners in caring for this greenway. And so this is an issue that we need to work through together. And as Geoff mentioned, there was a number of reasons given for, why the historical marker could not be placed at this location at this time, but this is something we very much want to work through together.
Mm-hmm. So it's this question then of which municipality it is located in. And we're talking again about a bridge. And there was also communication from the parks director, Gil de Normandy, that said that according to historical records, this unfortunate crime took place on the south side of the Meramec River, not on the north side. And then the city's attorney also then doubled down on this position, right, and told the Post-Dispatch that the denial had nothing to do with opposing the marker itself, but the issue was, again, this accuracy. Elizabeth, what would the marker itself even look like? And would Valley Park be expected to pay for it?
No, so the Equal Justice Initiative that Geoff described fabricates all these markers, and so they are paying to create them and transport them to the locations where they would be installed. So Great Rivers Greenway, we're not the history experts. We do design and program greenways to spark people's interests and curiosity to learn more about the stories of these places. So we do this through signs and art and programs and other tools for interpretation. So for example, each month we host several greenway tours all throughout the region. And what I really love about these greenway tours is how the participants share their own stories and personal memories and hopes for the future of these places. So what we're really creating is culture as a community. So we're doing this on the greenways. For example, this Saturday from noon to 4, we'll be celebrating the 21st annual Mary Meacham Freedom Crossing celebration on the Mississippi Greenway. This is Missouri's first nationally recognized underground railroad site. And each year, people from all throughout our region come together to share stories, to learn about St. Louis history through music and theater in a festive, family-friendly environment. And a lot of these places along greenways hold stories that shape the past, present, and future of our region. Each story has multiple perspectives. I think that the museum at the Gateway Arch National Park does a good job of this. When they renovated the museum, they made sure to tell the same story of westward expansion, but from multiple perspectives. So our goal for interpreting the greenways is to deepen understanding, broaden perspectives, engage with the world around us. And we cannot pretend that our history is perfect and sugarcoat these events. That makes people think that things weren't a big deal or can never happen again, or worse still, erase these stories. I think of how many people who are from St. Louis say, I've never heard of Mill Creek Valley. But by bringing the story of Mill Creek Valley back into public memory and celebrating the 20,000 people who made up this vibrant community, that's one of the goals of the Pillars of the Valley Monument along the Brickline Greenway. And so connecting people with the stories of these places along greenways all throughout the region is what we're hoping to do.
So it's more than just a physical artifact. It is meant to foster some real engagement among people with where they are, where they're standing, where they're walking.
Exactly.
We're going to take a very quick break here, but when we come back, we'll pick up with this conversation again. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.
Welcome back. Let's return to our conversation with Elizabeth Simmons, community manager at the nonprofit Great Rivers Greenway, and with Geoff Ward, who is a professor of African American Studies at Washington University. Before the break, we were talking about the city of Valley Park and the attorneys sort of doubling down on this position that the accuracy of where this lynching happened is in question. What was it like to hear that explanation, that basically said, John Buckner wasn't killed here, so memorial, that is not something we're interested in?
It was mostly disappointing. I mean, I think, I'll come back to the specific point about the location of the lynching, but just, as a resident of this community and also as a social scientist, who studies these issues and knows that we're haunted by the legacies of lynching. One of the best documented relationships between historic lynching and contemporary outcomes is with contemporary Black victim homicide. We know from study after study that lynching predicts the rate of homicide today, and the social science research suggests this has to do in part with the corruption of the rule of law and the extent to which people over generations have lost faith in our legal institutions and our governments and so forth. So this is part of what brings me as a sociologist to this work, is I think there's a real potential benefit to community reckonings with these issues when we publicly express our disavowal of the racist violence that we weren't ourselves responsible for, but that we've inherited as a sort of as a problem, as a history that we can and should address. What frustrated me about so that was disappointing that the city so far has taken the position that it has nothing to do with Valley Park. And on the specific issue of where the lynching happened, though, it was also frustrating to me because, in fact, the lynching, if we really think about it, was really a spatially distributed event. It happened across space. It happened when and where the mob formed, which included Valley Park, according to historical sources. It happened when and where he was abducted in Manchester from the place he was being detained after arrest. It happened all along the route the mob traveled with this young man they'd kidnapped through Valley Park, where apparently no officials intervened, leading to his execution by hanging from the bridge. But it didn't end there. Vast crowds are reported to have come out to see the body hanging the next day. And they took that experience, they took the lessons of the lynching back to the places they'd come from. Mm-hmm. So I think if we're honest with each other, we have to acknowledge that this is an event that happened in greater St. Louis, and that the epicenter was certainly in the vicinity of Valley Park. And the only thing I want to add to that, related to what Elizabeth was saying, is that we have right there this wonderful greenway that creates a space where people can safely gather, that overlooks the bridge where the vicinity where the lynching is believed to have occurred, whether it was in the middle or the north or the south side of that bridge. And we have the opportunity to really support community reflection and healing around this event if we can get cooperation from the city of Valley Park.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that really speaks to something I jotted down here, that in talking about accuracy, there really is not consideration of what the purpose of the marker is. And again, it's that conversation, it is exchange, it is engagement. I did not know about this, about the lynching there, until I read the Post-Dispatch article. And after that story came out, Elizabeth, you reached out to Valley Park to continue the conversation, if we can call it that. Were you hoping that something had changed about this city's position following the publication of that story?
Not so much change. It's really just a conversation that we're wanting to have to work through this together. And so that's just continuing on.
And I want to kind of put a fine point on this. It's about having a conversation, not necessarily about installing the plaque, right?
Well, it started out with a request for permission to install the marker. So Great Rivers Greenway would be installing this marker, and we need permission from the city of Valley Park to do so because it is their property. So in order to get that permission, you need to have a conversation.
Right. So you did receive a new response from the city's attorney, Tim Engelmeyer, and his statement had a new reason for the city's denial. Elizabeth, what was that reason?
Yeah, so there's a few things here. One of them is the feedback that they're hearing from their community members, and some of that is about what the charges for John Buckner were. As Geoff mentioned, he was being detained, and community members are saying we don't want to honor somebody who was being, charged with a crime. Well, I would say, I am not a judge, and neither were the people who killed him. This was an extrajudicial killing, and that is very common, unfortunately, among lynchings of the time.
Mm-hmm. And the communication that you received from Tim Engelmeyer said, quote, "The city has also received input from residents that feel any monument that honors an accused multiple offense rapist is wrong. Again, this is the input we received, and whether we agree with these views or not, they have the right to be heard." I mean, Geoff, hearing this, what do you think of this new argument?
Well, it reminds me of something I was going to say earlier in response to your question about my response to the initial reaction, which is that it really echoes what Valley Park residents were saying in the 1890s. The newspaper reports from the time, have headlines like "No investigation wanted." The people of Valley Park, the stories say, do not want this incident to be investigated, and so there will be no investigation. I mean, this is part of the unfolding of the event of the lynching itself. I could have kept going before the denial not only of protection prior to the lynching, but also the denial of justice in its aftermath is really key to the violence of racial terror lynching. And here we are in the 21st century where with residents and city officials saying effectively the same thing. We don't want to look at this. We don't want to give this any attention. It doesn't warrant it because we despise this figure. And I think one of the reasons we went back to the city of Valley Park is because we learned from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch reporting that the city attorney had said that, well, we're not necessarily opposed to placing a marker. We're just concerned about what it would say, and would it say the lynching happened right here? And so we thought this might have been a misunderstanding on their part. In fact, EJI drafts the language of the marker. Our coalition does, and I'm sure there's some back and forth that could be part of that. But we were only asking for permission to place the marker. So we saw this as an opening to go back and say, hey, maybe there's a misunderstanding. We think this is the perfect location for the marker for the reasons we've stated. And then we got this additional layer of opposition related to the will of the people.
Mm-hmm. And that the Post-Dispatch noted 2 days after that 1894 article that whenever the lynching of John Buckner is talked of, it is discussed as a good work, well done. Now, this is not the only historical marker that you all are working on placing. Both of your organizations, the Reparative Justice Coalition and Great Rivers Greenway, are involved in another memorial to another lynching, and that was the murder of Francis L. McIntosh in 1835. Geoff, you had mentioned that earlier. And that took place right here in St. Louis near Keener Plaza. Elizabeth, this memorial would also be placed on property maintained by Great Rivers Greenway. Have you encountered any difficulties getting a permit that mirror at all what's happening with Valley Park?
So the reason why Great Rivers Greenway is involved in this one is, as you said, we were a partner on the City Arch River project, and so we are involved in construction and operations at Keener Plaza. And so Reparative Justice Coalition submitted a permit application, and so it's just working through the permit approval process in the city of St. Louis.
Mm-hmm. So if this Keener Plaza memorial, if it does go up before there's sort of resolution reached with Valley Park, what effect might that have on what is happening in Valley Park, Elizabeth? Do you think it would move it forward? Would it set it back?
Well, I think this is just a larger conversation that we can have as a region. And the city of Valley Park, while it was not incorporated as a city at the time that John Buckner was murdered, the community existed. People lived there. People gathered there. So this is not to say that any singular city or group of people is, the people who killed John Buckner and Francis McIntosh, they're not still alive today. This is not one person's problem. We're not blaming a specific person or city. This is part of the larger story of St. Louis's history and a conversation that we can all be having together.
Elizabeth Simmons is Community Program Manager for Great Rivers Greenway, and Geoff Ward is Professor of African and African American Studies at Washington University and a member of the Reparative Justice Coalition. Thank you, Geoff and Elizabeth, for talking with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This episode was produced by Danny Wissentowski.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
St. Louis on the Air proudly supports local artists by using music from Life Creative Group.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.